spring practice either concluding or working towards the spring game now at a bunch of different locations. So let's waste no time. The whispers and intel that we're hearing, I want to go to Texas. They had a little pause out there, so they're a little bit behind where other programs have been. How good's that offense going to be, I think, speaking of Steve Sarkisian? That's probably the question on a lot of people's minds, Texas and otherwise, in year one under Steve Sarkisian. How good's the offense going to be? Now, if you talk to anyone at Texas, or if you talk to someone who's never been to a practice there but just has some common sense, they can easily tell you, he doesn't have the same kind of talent there that he did at Bama. There ain't no Devontae Smith, and Jalen Waddle and John Mechie. He doesn't have that kind of talent there at Texas. Well, no one else does either. Bama probably won't have that this year. So, yes, that's a no-brainer. However, they should have something. And so Jordan Whittington is an offensive name at the receiver position. Texas pretty readily knows they can count on. Trey O'Mary is a guy that they pretty readily know they can count on. I was reading some of Chip Brown's stuff over on horns247.com out of one of the recent practices, and those two names, he mentioned those two names. But then he kind of indicated, all right, past those two names, guys really need to step up. That's kind of what I assumed we would hear. That's validating what I assumed we would hear. They got to have guys step up. It's really that simple. They got to have guys step up, because if you watch Sark's system, it's great when you have the pieces. It's great. But like any other system, you got to have the pieces to make it functional. And so that's what spring is for. I imagine a lot of guys' heads are spinning out there. But wide receivers need to be better at Texas. Fortunately for them, again, it's just spring. And then there's this other backdrop around which everyone's spring practice is happening right now. And there's going to be a second wave of transfers inevitably coming after spring ball ends. So the reason I say that is, you may look right now and you may say, all right, I got 1, 2, and then question marks. Well, you never know what could be in Austin, or who, rather, could be in Austin in September that wasn't there right now and isn't here right now. I'm not just talking about late enrollees either. How about at Florida? Emory Jones' expectation level at quarterback. You're trying to follow up what Kyle Trask did last year, trying to follow up offensively what Florida did last year. Well, they're not going to, nor do I think most people down there expect them to, in terms of raw production. So if you want to do better, this is what a Florida fan looks at. Florida fan says, Emory Jones is not going to throw for the exact same amount of yards, touchdowns, etc. as Kyle Trask. He's a different quarterback. It's a different skill set. Could we give up some offensive production but gain wins? Like last year, they lost 4 games. Could they end up doing better record-wise this year, having not done as good or nearly as good in terms of overall offensive production? Yeah, that's possible. You'll have an early season test against Alabama week 3. So, yeah, that's possible. What has to happen there? Well, if you listen out of the scrimmages down at Florida, like Emory Jones' accuracy, it's not pinpoint. They're not going to have any kind of precision passing game. And anyone who's expecting that and then is let down in the fall has only themselves to blame, not Emory Jones or Dan Mullen. So let me make that crystal clear. That's not an expectation around here. But if that is an issue, or if it's just the reality, then they got to have that ground game. And that's where it's really fortuitous. That's where that running back room is really, really a good thing. Because I could name you 5 guys here. You could look at Naquan Wright, DeMarcus Bowman, if he's healthy, Dameon Pierce, Malik Davis, Lingard. Any of those guys at any given time could be a feature back on most teams, but could end up taking over a game or giving you the 114 yards on 21 carries that you need in a game this fall. Any of those guys, I'm not saying they all are, any of them are capable of that. And so out of that group of 5, you're going to get 2 or 3, should get 2 or 3 primetime contributors that will this fall hopefully close the gap and make up the difference for what you don't get in the passing game. So that's the fingers crossed approach at Florida right now. They're already done with spring. At North Carolina, they're not done. They got a really underrated offensive line depth situation in North Carolina. Quarterback's going to dominate the headlines there. We talked about it. We've not only talked about Sam Howell, but also Drake May, and why they project so well down the road, and why they, along with LSU, are 2 programs in really good spots in terms of the future of the program, because they've got quarterback figured out now and tomorrow. At least you assume. So I don't want to talk about quarterback, but I want to talk about the guys who protect that quarterback. Offensive line at North Carolina, really, really good spot right now. And I'm not just talking about the stat that you're going to see in preview magazine season, because you're going to see in preview magazine season take offense seriously for North Carolina because they return all 5 starters on the offensive line. And listen, yes, I do have to look at a sheet here. Asim Richards, Josh Azuda, Brian Anderson, Marcus McKeithen, Jordan Tucker. Those are the 5 returning starters. If I add Ed Montelis, they have about, I think it's 113 combined returning starts for their top 6 offensive linemen. You notice I mentioned 6. You can go past that 6th man. You can go 7, 8, 9, and arguably even 10. They've got really good depth there. If you talk to some folks at North Carolina, not only do they love their starters and certainly love quarterback, receiver, etc., they think they could afford to lose a couple of guys. They're not top heavy, in other words, on the offensive line the way that 99% of college programs are. Some college programs aren't even top heavy. Some college programs have about 3 or 4 offensive linemen they think they can win with. North Carolina's got 7 or 8, and really in emergency 9 or 10 they think they can win with. That's atypical. Okay, so if you're trying to look for someone to push Clemson, if you're trying to look for someone to be a surprise contender on the national level, well, that's a spotlight position on what is going to be a spotlight team this year at North Carolina. And I want to go to Iowa. We haven't talked about Iowa much. The Iowa program is always cloaked in anonymity because everyone just assumes, oh, it's the same team every year. Spencer Petras is going to be their starting quarterback this year in all likelihood, okay? So my question about Iowa is always, how good can they be at quarterback? Because I know I'm going to get a certain style of play and level of play from Iowa. It's always good enough to be an 8-4, 9-3 caliber program, and always good enough to pull an upset on anyone any given Saturday. But if they're going to be a program that gets over the hump, if they're going to be a program that threatens to play in Indianapolis, for example, it'd take good quarterback play. Now, Spencer Petras had a very up-and-down season last year, came on somewhat late. So the hope amongst Iowa fans is let's bottle up what we saw really late in the season, and then let's shake it up in spring and offseason, and then let's uncap it, and hopefully it spews into 2021, and we just go above and beyond and we overachieve at the quarterback position. Hey, I hope all that comes to fruition, but let me tell you this. Let me make it crystal clear. This was backed up by talking to someone close to the Iowa program last night. It is Spencer Petras or quite literally bust or fizzle, in other words. Imagine shaking up that bottle and then opening it and just goes, because then you find out it's like 7 years old Coke. Don't want that. So it's Spencer Petras or bust. You know I hate Peeps. You know I think Peeps are Satan's candy. Here's how it was described to me. The Iowa quarterback situation was described to me as the difference between Iowa being a top 10 to 15 team versus being the Peeps of college football. That's the difference between Petras coming through this year versus relying on anyone else on that roster. I don't think I've ever had a more violently accurate description of a program and a quarterback situation than that. So that's the spring intel we have for you right now. We'll continue to do that as long as spring camps continue around the country.